Well, hello everybody. Welcome to another live stream on the History by podcast. And today I'm joined by Dr. James Tabor. And before I continue, I'll just say one more thing: that Cameron Waters is unable to attend today. He's had something come up, and we will reschedule with him for another time, in which I'll have him and James appear together at a later date. With that being said, James, thank you for joining me today.
Absolutely. We'll be okay. I'd love to have Cameron here. He had a family emergency that just came up in the last hour. So they have a
Yeah,
newborn baby. So it's easy to imagine what might have happened if any of
absolutely.
you have had brothers, sisters, children, or whatever. But Jacob and I always have fun talking about all kinds of things. But I think we're still going to do so called Jewish Christianity. But I want to do some definitions, but I also have a text to mention to you. You might know it. I'll wait till we start, but uh, and that could kind of add to something that we probably wouldn't have covered in the regular show. So we'll still give people some really new things and some really interesting things to talk about. So
Right. To start us off, who exactly were the Ebionites?
that is the question of the hour, and the day, and the week, and the year, and the decade, and the millennium. And I actually want to back up and talk a little about terminology, meaning naming things. It's so strange how we are. We're 2,000 years plus removed. Let's start with the Dead Sea Scrolls. And everybody knows who they were, right? You and I have talked about this. We've done whole programs on the Dead Sea Scrolls, my course on the Dead Sea Scrolls that we talked about a long time ago, 2023. And everybody knows their Essenes. So we got our names, right? And then we got, well, the Ebionites, let's talk about them. And the Nazarenes, let's talk about them. And these names are part of the slippery slope that we go down because we think behind a name is a thing. And what you have to ask is, where did you get your idea? Let's just stay with the Ebionite. You say, who are the Ebionites? Well, they come to be a heretical sect of Christianity, condemned by the Orthodox in very harsh terms. I don't think they have any idea who they are because Epiphanius, who's one of the main sources, he's the heresy hunter of the ancient church. And he writes this breadbasket of all heresies, where he goes through them. He actually numbers them. It's almost funny, okay, number 29 and number 30, like you're calling out bingo cards or something. And he says, oh, Ebionites, they were named after a leader called Ebion. And that's one idea. And some think they're called the poor ones because their views of Christ are very poor. So you see what you're getting here. It's like worthless historically. So really, a group named themselves, we have bad views of Jesus, so let's call ourselves the bad Jesus people. It just doesn't even make sense. So I think we can answer that, but I still want to go back to the Dead Sea Scroll group a little bit and just talk about this thing about naming things. There's so many things we think we can name, but then if you begin to ask someone who is an expert in those areas, or someone who's really studied a certain body of literature, you'll find, how many times have you seen this, Jacob? The so-called scholar or expert, and many of them are experts, if they're really experts, they'll start deconstructing the name, right? So let's say you want to say, James, let's talk about the Apostolic Fathers. Oh, there's a thing in the ancient world called the Apostolic Fathers? We all know that's not the case. This is a modern collection that's put together by us, and then it does go back to the 4th or 5th century. And it tends to be just all the early stuff we can possibly find. And now today we even throw the Didache in, and that wasn't found until the late 19th century as far as a copy of it. And so I think the Dead Sea Scrolls are the same way. So I'll get to the Ebionites. I'm not forgetting your question, but I want to introduce this problem. with the Dead Sea Scrolls, because everywhere I go, everybody's like, this is an Essene-like movement. These are Essenes. This is an Essene. This is that. It's the most common name. If you ask, well, who wrote the Dead Sea Scrolls? 99 out of 100 are going to say, I know that, Dr. Tabor. The Essenes wrote them. Well, you know what my next question is going to be as a professor. Ah, really? So you know about the Essenes. Where did you get your knowledge of these Essenes? Well, if somebody studied a bit, they'll say, well, Josephus describes them in Book 2 of the Jewish War. Huh. Well, if I read Book 2 of the Jewish War, it sounds like he's describing a Greek philosophical sect. It's pretty long for the Essenes, but like the Pharisees, they start sounding like Stoics, right? Their views on fate. And you say the Sadducees, oh, well, they would be like Epicureans. So if you don't trust Josephus on the Pharisees and the Sadducees, where he describes them like a Greek sect, then why would you trust him much on the Essenes? So I always tell my students when we're studying the Dead Sea Scrolls, and it's the same thing with these Ebionites, you need to ask, where did you get what you think you know about these names? So, we'll have super chats come on and people can maybe share with us what they know. But let's stay at the Essenes just for a minute. Now, people have tried to say what the word means, and one possible derivation, I kind of lean toward this, is it's from the Hebrew word osim. Osa is to do, and osim would be the plural. Osim haTorah. Sounds kind of like Essene. Maybe you could put it into Greek as Essene, but we're not sure of that. So they're the doers. Well, then I open up Matthew or Luke, the so-called Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Plain or the Q material, the double tradition of material in Matthew and Luke that's not in Mark. And Jesus says, be doers of the Torah, not hearers only. Be Essene. You see what I'm saying? Be osim haTorah. But is that what he really means? Or does he just mean do it? You see, and now it turns into a name, the doers. Well, you open up the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they too talk about doing the Torah. They call themselves the doers. So maybe that's where the name came from. You open up Romans 2, and what does Paul say? Those who hear the law but don't do it will not have a reward. But those who do it, it's the doers of the Torah that will be rewarded according to the Torah. So there's the etymology of that name. If it's right or wrong, I don't know. But you know what I just told you? Nothing about the group. These names are not very helpful. So I think Evanim in Hebrew, Ebionites, comes from the poor ones. I don't think it was a guy named Ebion who had bad opinions of Jesus. So that's crazy. But then ask me the next question, because you already did. Okay, I already gave you the name, Tabor. What are they? Who are they? How do we know? And then we have to go to our sources and ask, what are the sources? Where are they mentioned? And what we find is there are in Epiphanius, the historian that names all the heretics, two groups, Ebionites and Nazarenes. He has long chapters. I believe it's 29 and 30. I mean, it's many pages telling you about all their views. I would rather just summarize them for you and then compare it to what he says about the Nazarenes. So I would say number one is they look to James the Just, the brother of Jesus. And you get that in the Pseudo-Clementines. You've done a lot on the Pseudo-Clementines. We even get it in a Nag Hammadi text that people are very familiar with in your audience, the Gospel of Thomas. You've done countless programs on that. And we do have this saying, I think, is it saying 12? The disciples ask, what should we do when you leave us? And he says, go to James the Just.
For whose sake all the heavens and the earth were made.
Beg your pardon?
For whose sake the heavens and the earth were made.
Yeah, exactly. And we think that phrase, for whose sake heaven and earth is made, refers to the Jewish legend that there would be the Lamed Vavniks, the 36 righteous. 70 stands for the full nation, like the Sanhedrin. 35 would be half, so we need one more to make it enough, 36. And there's a legend that among the humanity throughout the ages, there's 36 righteous, and they're the ones that sustain heaven and earth. You know, people could be very, very wicked. It goes back to Noah. Why does God save Noah, even though the rest are destroyed? Sodom and Gomorrah. Remember when God debates with Abraham, and Abraham says, wait, what if there are 50 righteous people in there? Would you still destroy it? No. And he gets him down to 10. So in this legend, it's 36, the 36 righteous. I don't know for sure if that's what the Gospel of Thomas means, but it does say, go to James the just. And we know that Paul, in his letters, Galatians particularly, talks about the pillars of the movement and talks about James being the leader. He talks about James, the brother of Jesus, going to visit him and so forth. Book of Acts brings up James. He seems to have the authority. So we can begin to put together a picture. So they do talk about we are, and I'm actually going to go over a list that I made, just talk about them, not read them to you. Mainly from the Pseudo-Clementines. So I would say the central authority of James the Just would be one of their key tenets. They would also say that Jesus of Nazareth, the historical Jesus of Nazareth, was born of a woman, of a natural union between Joseph, his father, and Mary, his mother. And he was deified or declared to be exalted and glorified, but not born of a virgin or born without a human father or anything like that. And they really prefer, rather than Christ, although by the 3rd, 4th century, you just say Christ, you don't have to say Jesus, but we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth, that he's the true prophet. Now, what is that about? That has to do with a passage in Deuteronomy, I believe it's chapter 18, where Moses says, in the future, God will raise up to you a prophet like me. And at the end of Deuteronomy, when Moses is dying and even dead and buried in that last chapter, the writer says there's never been a prophet like Moses to whom the Lord spoke face to face as a man speaks to his friend. So this idea that someday would come the prophet of prophets. That's why in the Gospel of John, remember when they're asking John the Baptizer, like, who are you? Are you the Christ? It'd be probably the Davidic Messiah. Are you the prophet? That would be that prophet like Moses. So as far as we can tell from the Clementines particularly, and these groups begin to merge as we're going to get into. I'm trying to kind of do some scrambled eggs here to show you the names are not as helpful as getting the views together. They would say Jesus of Nazareth is that true prophet like Moses. Well, that means he has ultimate authority. Now, if he passes it on to James, it could be, in their view, because they talk about the Spirit hastening through the ages in various generations in some of their literature that they have, and resting upon the one in whom God is well pleased. But anyway, let's stay with Jesus for a while. He's the true prophet. Now that's quoted in the book of Acts. So we do have Christian texts, not only them asking John, are you the prophet? But in Acts 7, where Stephen is talking, he ends his speech before he's stoned in that narrative. And he goes, this is indeed the prophet like Moses that was prophesied. And then he quotes, I will raise up to you a prophet like Moses. So that's important. So what he isn't might be more important in that regard than what he is, meaning he's not virgin born. He's not the divine son of God. He's not incarnated, a pre-existent divine son. He's not, and it was there so far from the Trinity. It's not even funny. And that's their Arius said that Jesus was not always divine, Remember, they had this big debate during the Constantinian Nicene Council in 325. And the way you could identify an Arian, I've always told my students this, they get a kick out of it. You got one question. So, Jacob, I'm going to find out if you're an Arian. Was there a time when he was not? And if you go, well, yeah, I mean, before God created him, what? God created him? So he's a created being? You're an Arian. You're a heretic. Get out of here, you see. Now, the Ebionites are worse. They don't just say, oh, yeah, God created him. No, he's the Spirit rests upon them. So when they read the baptismal scene, they're probably going to use Matthew, but it's quoted in Mark as well. This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased. But it also says, this day have I begotten you in the Gospel of the Ebionites and Nazarenes and the Gospel of the Hebrews. You get these different names. Again, you got Gospel of the Hebrews, Gospel of the Nazarenes, Gospel of the Ebionites. So that's a big one. I mean, to the early Christians in the 3rd and 4th century, and even all the way back, I would say to Irenaeus, when you really get kind of organized Christianity, you know, remember Justin, he says, well, he was kind of a pre-existent being that appeared in the Hebrew Bible. That's actually Jesus that talks to Moses. That's in his pre-incarnation state. So you're working towards something like that. Ebionites would go, no, he's an ordinary human being. He's born of a woman, born of a human father. So that makes them heretics right there. There's no way that they could even recite the Apostles' Creed, much less the Nicene Creed, that talks about eternal with the Father of one substance. They would just be like, no, how could you blaspheme? There's only one God. So when I say Christ is the true prophet, keep in mind, yes, that's exalting him, but to an Orthodox person, or even many Gnostics that think he pre-existed as like a divine being in heaven in the world of light and came down into the world of darkness to bring revelation and so forth, that would just be such a problem. You can call him the true prophet, but I mean, any Christian would go, of course he's the true prophet. But we still got the trick question. Was there a time when he was not? And so he's an ordinary human being, but he's so powerfully filled with the Spirit that he's begotten by God, and in whom this is my beloved Son, in whom I am pleased to rest, is the way they saw it, or dwell. And that idea of the bird coming down, it might even be the idea that it lands in his head and makes a nest. And then, you are my beloved Son, in you I am pleased to dwell. This day I've begotten you. So you put all those together. That's a big heresy that they held. They also are very skeptical of revelations and ecstatic authority by someone who would come along later, like in the 2nd century, after the apostles are gone, after James is gone, after Simon, the successor of James, is crucified by Hadrian. They're very skeptical if you say, I had a revelation yesterday, and God told me that I am X, Y, or Z. You see? And they put Paul in that category. Let's call it the late comer, the 13th apostle. Like Jesus chose the 12, and then Judas is eliminated. We think, according to Acts at least, that they replaced him, and that's a closed circle. Okay. Now, James is in charge of the 12, but you've got James and the 12. So when Paul talks about those resurrection sightings in 1 Corinthians 15, remember how he says to the 12, to Peter, to James, to all the apostles. These are kind of like categories of these leadership positions. But that's really important in the pseudo-Clementines, because if somebody like Paul comes along and says something like, I got a revelation directly from Jesus, not from James, not from Peter, not from John, not from any of the apostles. I talked directly to Jesus, which Paul says in his letters, right? I mean, he has conversations with Jesus. In fact, one of the biggest conversations he has that most scholars don't even agree is a conversation, but I've always thought it was, I received of the Lord, or from the Lord, that which I've also delivered to you, delivered paradidomai. I'm officially handing this to you as revelation, right? Officially passing it on. That the Lord Jesus, on the night he was betrayed, took bread, took the cup, and so forth. This is my body, this is my blood. Well, Mark takes that and puts it in the gospel, and presumably got it from Paul's letter, which I think would be earlier. But where did Paul get it? And the Ebionites, I think, would say, we never heard of anything like that. What do you mean you got it from Jesus? Oh, yeah, Jesus told me that. And I wrote my dissertation on Paul's ascent to paradise. And he says, I talked to Jesus 3 times. I said, Lord, take away this thorn in the flesh. He had some sort of physical affliction, or maybe the attack of a demon, because he calls it an angel of Satan. But he's getting attacked somehow, spiritually attacked. And he's talking to Jesus, and Jesus goes, no, I'm not going to take it away. This is conversation stuff. And he talks about speaking to the Lord and receiving words from the Lord meaning Jesus. So that idea of later people getting revelations that would go contrary or in addition to, and that's part of the history of religions, right? Can you think of a religious movement that doesn't later have somebody else come and try to straighten it all out? In our own time, what do we have? Ellen G. White, Joseph Smith. What do we have during the time of the rise of Islam? Muhammad has now got he's got the revelation of the Quran and so forth. So they're against all that. They believe that the Torah and the prophets are still valid and they haven't been eliminated or done away. And that leads me to the next point. They don't like Paul. So not only is Paul claiming revelations, but they would say he's a false apostle, that he's not even an apostle. So they reject Paul. And all of our sources agree on that. Epiphanius is very prejudiced, but I think he does reflect some of the real things about Paul. It's sort of similar to Marcion in the sense that we try to reconstruct his basic core ideas, the antitheses. We don't have a copy. And with Paul, we're in better shape because we have Paul saying things that they would quote, probably the Ebionites, if they dare touch one of his letters, and they would say, no, we don't accept that. And their argument was kind of interesting. They would say, okay, we're not saying you didn't speak to someone. Follow this. We're not saying you didn't get a revelation. You probably got a revelation, but how do you know it was Jesus? We saw Jesus. We touched him. We were with him. And James, if he were part of the discussion, would say, absolutely. And I grew up with him, and he's my brother, you see? And they would say, we don't know who you talk to. And that could apply to Paul or anybody else that comes along and says anything different from what they have received. Now, Jacob, think of Galatians 1. It's almost humorous. What does Paul say? He takes that argument and applies it to him. Isn't that amazing? He says, I preached to you the gospel that I got by revelation from Jesus, not from man or through man. Neither did I receive it from those who were apostles before me. Think of that language. And then what does he do? And even if I later told you it was fake, it was from a demon, even if I told you that, or anyone else tells you that, to hell with him, meaning to hell with me even. I'll quote it in the King James because I remember that. Though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel to you than that which we have preached to you, let him be accursed. It's a great Ebionite statement. You see how Paul's taking their idea, and I'm using Ebionite because we're generally talking about the group. I don't think they went around calling themselves that as their main name. They probably call themselves the Way or the people of the covenant. people of the new covenant. They might have called themselves the Yakad, the church, the group. You know, is so-and-so a member of the Yakad? Is that person in our assembly, in our gathering, and so forth? And in Greek, Paul would say the church. So remember when he kicks the guy out in 1 Corinthians 5 for sleeping with his father's wife, he's not even there, but remotely he says, when you are together, and notice the language, and the Spirit of Christ is present, and my spirit is present. What, he can project his spirit into the assembly, deliver the guy to Satan. It sounds like a ceremony, you know, like we would picture a group coming together and say, we hereby condemn you to Satan. And, you know, it sounds like it's just very strange stuff to modern ears. They have an aversion to the sacrifices, and they go to the book of Jeremiah. Cameron was going to talk some about that because he's made a film about called Christspiracy, but he'll come back and talk to us about it. And so they're vegetarian, and they don't drink wine. We go to what we know of James the Just. The earliest record would be Hegesippus, preserved in Eusebius. And he does seem to get pretty good quotes of Hegesippus, who was a Jewish Christian convert from the 2nd century. And he says James never touched wine or meat. They would say that John the Baptizer, in their text, they say he didn't eat locusts and wild honey. That word locust is one letter different in Greek from the word honey cake. So it's actually talking about a desert kind of manna type thing that you could eat from a plant. And that's also reflected in Slavonic Josephus, which is a Russian Slavonic copy of Josephus that talks about he would not eat any prepared food. Now, we don't know if all the Ebionites went along with that, but we're pretty sure that they thought you should not eat dead flesh. It almost sounds like some of the cynics. Remember Diogenes, my favorite statement from Diogenes? They go, why don't you eat meat? Why don't you go to the temple and enjoy the meal we're having? I will not make my body a tomb for a dead beast. Typical kind of cynic statement. But they would actually go to Jeremiah 7, and where Jeremiah says, in the day I led you out of Egypt, I didn't command you about burnt offerings and sacrifices. Well, what are you talking about? Exodus 25 through Numbers 10 is all about the temple, the tabernacle, every sacrifice, how to do it. And that was when he led them out of Egypt, Exodus 25, a few days after Sinai. They would say, no, no, no. That's written by the false pen of the scribes, the priests. It almost anticipates the P source of the documentary hypothesis. Isn't that interesting? Have you ever thought about that? They were kind of saying, you know, all that P material about sacrifice and slaughter, that's not from God. Well, then you got a real problem, because you can't just open up a book like the Torah, 5 books of Moses like we have it today, and say, this is the Torah, and the Torah is not done away, because they don't think that's the Torah. They think that parable of Jesus in Matthew about the wheat and the tares, remember? They think the tares are false doctrines, and they've been seeded now with the wheat, which Jesus and James planted, and it's growing up together. And at the harvest, which is the judgment at the end, God will come back and reap it all together and separate the tares from the wheat and burn up the tares and reward the wheat, you know, with the kingdom of God and so forth. So those would be good Ebionite texts. There was an old joke once where somebody said something about eating fish and bones, and they say, well, when I invite somebody for a fish dinner, this is not an Ebionite joke, this is my joke. If I invite somebody for a fish dinner, I expect them to have enough sense to pick out the bones. Well, they would say that about the Bible. I have an inner sense when I'm reading, say, Exodus or Leviticus or Deuteronomy, and I can pick out those interpolations because they're not marked in color or anything in any manuscript. But they don't think God ever, they want to go back to before the flood, the Eden ideal, and in the kingdom, according to Isaiah 11, where they won't hurt or slaughter on the holy mountain of God, which is the new temple that'll be rebuilt and so forth. So Paul alludes to this in Romans 14, where he brings up two issues, eating flesh and drinking wine. He takes a very non-Ebionite position, and he says that anyone who has these scruples is a weak brother. Who did he just name as a weak brother? Think of it. James the Just, the leader of the entire movement. He says, if a weak brother comes in, like James visits, oh yeah, he's coming, he doesn't eat meat or drink wine. Oh well, we'll humor him, we won't serve meat or alcohol since he's here. But that's a weak brother, meaning there's nothing wrong with it. God puts a blessing on eating meat in Genesis 9. Those are probably the main things that I would emphasize. We think they might be non-violent as well, and really emphasize trying to live by the Sermon on the Mount, turn the other cheek, and so forth. They're very apocalyptic. They are reading these texts, these New Testament texts. They have a Hebrew version of Matthew. And particularly after 70, if you read Matthew 24, which is the synoptic apocalypse of Matthew, you're going to get the idea that Jesus is coming really soon. It talks about the Great Tribulation, and immediately after those days of tribulation, the Son of Man will come in the clouds of heaven and so forth. So they're kind of a terminal group, although they do continue. By terminal, I mean their expectations are dashed. So those are some of the things we think we can recover from the sources. If you go by Epiphanius, he would say, well, it's really because of the book of Acts. Do you remember in Acts, I think it's 20, one of the speeches in Acts, I don't remember, chapter 22 or 3, where Paul's on trial in Caesarea. Remember, he has to appear before these different Roman procurators and also Agrippa. And he says, he's accused of being the ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes. Now, because that word is in Acts, Epiphanius and other church fathers want to make a separation with another group they call the Nazarenes. And they're very similar in many ways, but they don't reject Paul. Now, I don't think they're Trinitarians. I get no idea that they're Trinitarians. Epiphanius would want them to be, of course, but he still puts them as a heresy. So maybe he doesn't think they're Trinitarians. But this rejecting Paul is a big deal because, I mean, that is a real cleavage. Since Paul becomes so influential in the 3rd and 4th centuries, as in a sense, he's just almost like the founder of the movement. You know, Paul settles all issues because we got all these letters of Paul talking about what to do about this, that, and the other, and how to solve all these problems. And if you accept all 13 letters of Paul and even the book of Hebrews, you got this whole religion developing that you could call Paulinism by the late 2nd, 3rd into the 4th century, and then all the way down through from Augustine on. And of course, Luther, man, totally. So when you say, who are the Ebionites, that's the long answer. I think we can come up with some of their characteristics, and we can say that they existed. Now, what I want to do, and then we'll talk more about all this terminology business, is show you something that Cameron Waters noticed and showed me. I'll have to confess something here. I've never read the complete volumes of Epiphanius. He goes on and on, Jacob. Have you ever read all of them? It's hundreds of pages about these different groups. But he starts with section 1, Jewish groups, not Christian. Now listen to this. To me, this was a big revelation. You'd think after a PhD at Chicago, somebody would have told me this, or I would have come across it. I guess I didn't prepare myself. But if any of you want to go online, you can call up Epiphanius. It's Against All Heresies, I think he calls it. What does he actually name his book in English?
Panarium.
Panarium, even in English. Yeah, that's right. It's Panarium. So in number 18, Sec 5 of the 18 heresies of the Jews. Isn't this something? Number 5. It's like he goes through 18 false groups of Jews, and then he gets to the Christians. And by then he's in chapter 29 and 30, and he does the Ebionites and the Nazarenes. But listen to this. Number 18, against the Nazareans. Now, notice the spelling. It's the same in Greek. Nasar, Nazareans. So there's a Jewish group called the Nazareans.
Yeah, I've heard of that one before.
Before Jesus. Nothing to do with Christianity. Now, they are Jews by, I'm reading just a few phrases from the English translation. They're Hermo-Baptists, Homero-Baptists, rather. Homera's day, daily Baptists. Okay, so they're baptizing all the time like the Mandeans. So they're Homero-Baptists, regular Baptists. So even though you probably get baptized to enter the group, they do baptisms all the time. Now you could say, well, all Jews go to the mikveh if they're Orthodox and they do baptisms all the time. Whenever you say Homero-Baptist as a technical term in Greek in Epiphanius, he doesn't mean rites of ritual purity that are common in Judaism, where you go to a ritual pool or a river. He's talking about they do kind of daily cleansing from their sins. So you have some sort of a baptismal rite when you go in. Similar to Qumran. When you are at the at the settlement of Qumran, on the north side, it's actually, let's see, that it's a little bit to the west. Let me just think. Yeah, northwest side. The northwest side of the camp. There's actually a perimeter around the camp, a wall. That's the pure zone. You go in and out through a baptismal pool. So if you have to go to the bathroom, to the latrine, it's outside the camp, then you come back in and you say, well, what is that, like for cleansing? No, it's ritual purity. It's actually a mikveh. I bet many of your viewers have been to Qumran and seen that. They are Jews by nationality, and they live in the Transjordan. This sect practiced Judaism in all respects and have scarcely any beliefs beyond the ones I've mentioned. So he's only on number 5. So he's basically saying, I'm not going to repeat everything I've said about all these other groups. They also practice circumcision. They keep the Sabbath. They observe the festivals. And they reject fate and astrology. You know how the Torah says don't go by the stars and don't go to seances and things like that. They recognize his fathers, Adam to Moses. And he actually names all the people down to Joshua. And they keep all the Jewish observances. But listen, they would not sacrifice or eat meat. Now this is before we ever get to Jesus, and I don't know the date of these people, but they're pre-Jesus because he hasn't even got to the Christians yet. And he's only on number 5 of the 18. So there's already within Judaism, and it's probably influenced by Hellenistic religions and Hellenistic ways of life. It's pretty widespread in the Hellenistic world to be a vegetarian and to not drink wine as a higher spiritual state. And so I think that's probably where they're getting it. They also say that the books that order sacrifices are forgeries. Well, I just said that about the Ebionites. And now the Nazareans are saying it before the Ebionites ever came along. So you see how these terms are very fluid? It ends up that we're talking about a group. We're talking about a series of groups, probably over 100, 200, 300-year period, that have a set of characteristics. And that's why I began with the floating nomenclature, where people go, oh, is he an Essene? Oh, is he an Ebionite? Is he a Nazarene? Like, these are tags that people wore and said, I carry my membership card in this group. That's not how it was. But if I say, well, name some of your views, well, I'm Jewish, or I'm of the people of Israel, really, they would say, and I follow Moses and the prophets. They claim the books are forgeries and that the fathers never gave these customs that have to do with sacrifices and eating meat. Let's see what else. I'm not going to go all the way through it. I think they even... Anyway, that's enough on them. It's very short. It's just a few. It's 1.5 pages. I'll read the ending. But once more, I shall pass by this sect's strangeness and foolishness. Notice he's being very objective. And I'm content with the few words that I've said, inserted here with my limited ability to oppose the era of the sect we've been discussing. Next, I won't do these. The Oseans. Remember Oseans, Essene. So lesson number 1. How long have I been talking here? Lesson number 1 in the interview is, if somebody gives you a name, ask them this question. Before I give you a yes or no about this, that, or the other being Essene or Ebionite or Nazarene, tell me where you got your definition of that term, to whom does it apply as you understand it, and what are your sources? And it is not consistent. The best example is the Dead Sea Scrolls. They never call themselves Essenes. I mean, isn't that interesting? We call them that. And I don't know. I try not to say that. I say the Qumran group or the Qumran community, or I try to use the names that they used. And I think it's the same with the Jesus movement. I mean, think about it. In our entire New Testament, what is the group called? What is the Jesus, John the Baptist, James, Paul, Peter, John, what is the movement called? Well, in Acts, we have, is it chapter 11? The disciples were called Messianists first at Antioch. Christians, we say today, Messianist. Okay, well, that's, according to that, that's at Antioch later. But if we could fly back to the time of Jesus in our time machine, or even to the time of the teacher of righteousness 150 years earlier, maybe, and say, who are you guys? What do you do? I don't know that they would have a name as much as they would describe, well, we're followers of the Torah, we're doers of the Torah, and we're a part of the new covenant, and we are waiting for the 2 Messiahs. They would probably tell you their views. But just the name, like Christian, I get asked all the time in comments on YouTube, people go, is Tabor a Christian? I wonder if Tabor's a Christian. What's a Christian? Is Jacob a Christian? Was he a Christian? People just love these tags, like we're all going to be given ID cards with a name on them. Well, do you know any Christians that agree on everything? Well, maybe a few, but not very many. And if they do, they're probably forced to. Like, this is the creed, and you better believe all 22 points, so you can't be in our group. But they're not going to get a lot of members. As we know, in most churches, people go, yeah, I know our church teaches that. I have a slightly different view. And especially if it's a Bible-based church, because then the Bible's out there for everybody to interpret. And so they're going to come up with all kinds of things, especially on subjects like prophecy. everything from futurist to preterist to, anything in between. So I hope I gave you some characteristics of them, but I don't know if I really defined the term because I'm trying to deconstruct the term and say that it's not very useful. So what would be useful? What would be useful is to try to talk about maybe the movement after the death of Jesus that looked to James the Just as their leader and his successors, the Desposunai, as they're called, and the family of Jesus. And they would be not in any way equivalent to ideas, but remember when Muhammad died, according to legend, you have this split. And it's the same as if you take somebody like Eusebius and his view of Christianity and the followers of James. Eusebius mentions James. As I said, he quotes Hegesippus. He admits that James was given the leadership of the community. But as time goes on, they begin to say, well, he's head of the Jerusalem church, almost like he's a bishop, like there's the bishop of Rome, the bishop of Antioch, the bishop of Ephesus, and James and his successors, Simon and others, they're bishops of Jerusalem. No, that's not the view that Eusebius even gives you. He says that the apostles turned to James as the leader of the movement. So I think that's better than having a term, names. I think it's okay to use names. People are still going to use them. But here's my question I always ask my students. What was Jesus? Give me his identifying name. What religion was he? Say, well, he was Jewish. Well, do you mean like ethnically? He came from Jewish ancestry? But what was his religious faith called? I don't know. What was Paul's religious faith called? Does Paul ever use the term Christian? Paul, depending on the letters, right? But does he ever use the term Christian? Isn't Christian only in Peter? Is it? Do you remember, Jacob?
Acts.
I know it's in Acts, but when is it in the epistles?
It's not in any of Paul's letters. If
it's
in them, it's
Peter, either 1st or 2nd Peter, yeah.
I'll find out.
If anyone suffers as a Christian.
I think it might be 2nd Peter.
2nd Peter. So that's pretty late.
I'm not positive. Hold on.
So I don't know that the group had a name. You say, well, I want to have the name that the original followers of Jesus had. Maybe Nazarene. But what does that mean? Let's talk about Nazarene. Go ahead.
1 Peter.
1 Peter, okay.
I just want to say that real quick.
1 Peter. So, good to have our software, isn't it? when our memory slips. Well, I got all these things I'm trying to cover. So now let's talk about Nazarenes for a while. I think that it basically has to do with Netzer, which is a word from Isaiah 11, where there's a metaphor given of a stump of Jesse. Jesse's the father, the biological father of David, King David. So the stump of Jesse is cut off. That means the line of Davidic kings is cut off. And then it says, but there will come forth a branch or sprig from the stump of Jesse, Netzer. So it actually means branch. So when I say, well, I'm a Nazarene, if I could go back in time to the 1st century, and we're speaking Aramaic or Hebrew, I would go, oh, so you're a follower of the branch? Who do you think the branch is? Are you waiting for the branch? Do you think the branch has come? Because that branch is then described in great detail in that chapter. That is the biggest, largest chapter and most important chapter in the Hebrew Bible for the Davidic Messiah. I don't know why Christians don't read it more. It's literally a job description. It's a job description. It says he will come forth, he will do this, and he will do this, and you just go check it off. But one of the things he's supposed to do There are two really big jobs that he's got. He's got to gather all the tribes of Israel back to the land. Well, we have a saying in Q, I've chosen 12 of you because you will sit on 12 tribes, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. In the Dead Sea Scrolls, in the Community Rule and Damascus document, when we get the organization, the teacher and a council of 12. It doesn't say because of the tribes, but 12, maybe. Well, that's before the Jesus movement, you see. So what's happened is we've tried to put everything into these silos. And when you say, I'm a branchite, so let's go to Acts again, Paul. You're a ringleader of the sect of the branchites. Well, okay, by then, they're probably calling the Jesus people the branchites. It's almost like saying messianist. And you know how people today, they'll talk about somebody's Jewish. You hear this, you live in Texas. Down in Houston, you've got congregations, Messianic Jews. See these labels, Messianic Jews. What do you mean Messianic Jews? Well, we all know what it means if we're in those cultures. We have it here in Charlotte too. We have 2 or 3 Messianic Jewish congregations or synagogues. Looks like a synagogue, feels like a synagogue, but it's a Messianic synagogue. Well, technically, all Jewish synagogues would be Messianic synagogues if they accept Isaiah 11, because that is a prophecy that someday God will send the Davidic Messiah. And in the Jewish prayer book, I've got one right here, you pray that every day that God will send the Davidic Messiah. So how can you tell me that they're not branchites? They're like people waiting for the branch to come. But we now use it as a technical term to Jews who think Jesus is the Messiah. Well, who came up with that definition? What a strange way we use language. So, I'm a Messianic Jew. Okay, I know what you mean, but why would you use a term like that? Why don't you just say, I'm a Torah observant Jew? Oh, well, that wouldn't show that I believe in Jesus. Or why don't you say, I'm a Jew for Jesus, which there is an organization that just comes right out. So nobody can miss it. I'm a Jew for Jesus. So we're no better on terminology. Do you remember, Jacob, that time we talked about Waco and David Koresh, and we talked about all the terms, and people go, are you a branch Davidian? And you interview branch Davidians, and they go, no, we're not branch Davidians. We're just Davidians. And others are like, no, we're just Bible students. And then you go to the Jehovah's Witnesses and the Russellites that still exist today that followed Charles Taz Russell that led to the Jehovah's Witnesses. And you ask them, are you a Jehovah's Witness? You follow Russell? He started this movement. And definitely Jehovah's Witnesses. All it meant was we're witnessing to Jehovah. It's from Isaiah. You are my witnesses, says the Lord. But now it becomes a name that you incorporate, you see. And so the Davidians were a group that formed by Victor Hadouf in the 1950s and 40s and 30s. And then the branch Davidians are a branch of that group. And did you know that David Koresh basically said, I'm not a branch Davidian, really. I'm a student of the 7 Seals. Oh, now we have a new name, the 7 Seal people, the 7 Seals of the Book of Revelation. And you know what? Baptists have trouble because they split all the time. So they've kind of solved it. Just keep the word Baptist always and then come up with another thing to show you're still Baptist. So you could say, you know, free will Baptists or hard shell Baptists or this kind of Baptist or that kind of Baptist. And then we get American Baptists and Southern Baptists. Southern Baptist is a real funny one because it's like, what, in the Southern, you have to be in the South to be a Southern Baptist. What if you're in Maine? You can be a Southern Baptist in Maine, but the headquarters, you know, tends to be in the South. So you know what I want to say? Let's forget all the names and just look at the evidence. Let's look at texts. And I think if we do that, then we're going to be better off. So let's describe what we know about Ebionites, Nazarenes, New Covenanters, people of the way. The way is a big thing in the book of Acts. It seems to be kind of a technical term. It's also in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They talk about the way all the time. Go to the Didache. There are two ways. There are two ways, right? You go to the Community Rule, Damascus document. There are two ways. Well, we're people of the way, meaning the right way. What does Jesus say? I'm the way, the truth, and the life. So if you follow Rabbi Jesus, and his group, you'd be followers of the way as it was defined. So for me, it's more interesting to try to describe what's going on at any one time. So if we're talking about the Dead Sea Scrolls, I would say, let's go by their characteristics and what we find in their writings. So they're an apocalyptic, messianic group. They believe that they are the people of the new covenant. It's already arrived and they're part of the new covenant. They are separatists. They think other groups are wrong and they are right. They are children of light, not children of darkness, and so forth. Then you flip up to Paul, 1 Thessalonians 5. You are children of light, not of darkness. Are you going to connect that to Qumran? Well, maybe the name and the term, but I mean, surely you're not going to think Paul is literally like the Community Rule because he doesn't follow any of that. So to me, the names aren't helpful. Now, here's my favorite, Gnosticism. I love that one. I said, well, I think he was kind of a Gnostic, wasn't he? Well, define it, and I guess we could talk about it. Or how about small g? There's big G and small g, right? And, well, again, what's the difference between a little Gnostic and a capital G Gnostic? Probably the degree of formation of the group with set views and ideas. And I'm telling you, if you study religious movements as I do, you know, my field is ancient Mediterranean studies, Hellenistic religions, Second Temple Judaism, the Jesus movement, Christian origins, you know, kind of I'm pulling down. But then you begin to talk about these different groups that exist all down through history that I'm very interested in, particularly apocalyptic groups is one of my specialties. By the way, my next course I'm going to offer with Derek Lambert's MVP courses is called let's see, Waiting for the End Times Through the Ages. And it's going to be a course on tracing biblically oriented apocalyptic movements from Qumran all the way down to 2026. We'll do some of the modern ones at the end. And we'll probably have more by the time I offer the course. But what a group always has to do, if they begin to form, usually among a charismatic leader of some type or leaders, and they're meeting and they have a certain vision of things, and then they say, what do you think we should call ourselves? And Russell told his followers, just call yourself Bible students. Well, that's not really a name, is it? Well, yeah, it became a name. There are groups today all over America, all over Europe. They're the holdout Russellites. They're not in the JWs. They're not part of Jehovah's Witnesses. And if you ask them what they are, you know what they say? It's very odd. You go, well, what is your faith? We're Bible students. You're Bible students. Well, anyone who studies the Bible is a Bible student, but they don't mean that. See, they've made it into a name, not just a description of what they might have been. But at the time Russell gave it, I read his writings, he wanted to avoid denominationalism. See? So, Jacob, you know a lot about religion. Let's say you're going to start a religion, and I'm just going to call it Jacobites. Well, no, we can't do that because there are Jacobites already. Burmanites? Nah, it's too hard to spell. Did you say burn or berm or? We'll just have to come up with a name for your group, Jacob. Questers? Quakers, Pentecostals is one of my favorite. Why? Because they believe that the experiences of charisma that was given in Acts 2 are still operable today. So they say Pentecostal. Then that can get appended to any church. So now you've got a characteristic. So I'm sorry this is turning out to be more on nomenclature, but we did talk about what we know about the group that gets the tag Ebionites. And I think we covered kind of the main things. Now, there's this other document I wanted to mention to you, and I will send you the link where you can put it in the description. You probably are aware of it, but in 1966, I remember this, Jacob, because I was in 1966 graduating from college with a bachelor's degree in Greek, and a book came out by Shlomo Pines. Do you know the book, Shlomo Pines?
Yeah, I know who Slimo Pines is.
Yeah. Remember, he's the one who talks about the Arabic sources for the testimony
Yes.
of Jesus and so forth. But the book by Shlomo Pines is a new source for the history of Jewish Christianity. And it's a PDF. You can download it off the internet. Some of your listeners are very good at this. They'll go find it right now. But I'll give you the link. It's a little book. I think it's 60 pages maybe. And it's a 10th century Muslim who is discussing and debating with Christians. So it's going to remind you of this book that we've also talked about, Howard's book, Hebrew Matthew, George Howard. We call it Evan Bohan or Shem Tov. And this book is pulled, it's the Hebrew text of Matthew that's pulled from a rabbi, Ibn Shaprut of the 14th century, who is quoting the version of Matthew he has and then refuting Christianity. Okay. This Arabic book by this Muslim cleric or scholar is quoting what he knows of Christians and refuting them. You know, how are they different from us now that we have the true revelation of Muhammad? We want to be able to argue with them because they're going to say this and we're going to say that to counter them. But when he starts talking about the Christians that he's describing, they're key parts of his description that don't fit Orthodox Christians in the West. So who is he talking about? He must be talking about sources and texts that he encountered from Arabian and Arabic sources, maybe even in Arabia, that were passed down to him. And you can read it, and it's very interesting. But a lot of the characteristics are Ebionite characteristics, like they don't believe Jesus is God or anything like that. Well, Christians by that time believe Jesus is God, if they're Nicene Chalcedon Christians. So I don't know if you read the whole book. I just started rereading it. When it came out in 1966, I heard of it, and it was very controversial. It was almost like finding Evan Bohan or the Didache. It was like, wow, we have, you know how we want new sources, or the Nag Hammadi. Like we find a new text that nobody's seen. And everybody got all excited about it. And then the naysayers started coming in and saying, yeah, but it's not like the Mishnah. You got a 10th century AD text, and you're trying to project it back on a group 8 or 9 centuries earlier and say this can be a new source for Jewish Christianity. Well, I happen to think that we do that all the time, because you got to ask, how old is your copy that you have of the Didache? Right? How old is it? You can look that up. I don't know offhand, but I'm talking about the actual copy that was found in the Library of Jerusalem in Constantinople and is now in Jerusalem in the Orthodox Patriarchy. It's not, I mean, none of these manuscripts are like 1st or 2nd or 3rd or 4th century, right? these manuscripts that we trust. How about Josephus? I gave my students recently a chart just to kind of make them think a little bit. We so confidently quote a text, and we say, now we date this to about the second century, mid-second century, maybe late second century. Oh, Tabor thinks it might be early. You see what we're doing? First Clement is my favorite. You worked a lot on First Clement, and say, well, it's probably around 96 AD. Oh, really? Okay, good. What's the oldest copy of it? Like you're reading it, Greek Clement, the copy itself. I don't remember offhand, but I think it's way down into the Middle Ages, isn't it? I'm pretty sure. Now, it doesn't mean it didn't exist because people quote it or allude to it and so forth. But I just say that to throw a little caution into the discussion. And I think that we should look at all these sources. People say the Mishnah, we date that to maybe the third or fourth century. And the Jerusalem Talmud, it's always 100 years of, fourth or fifth, and the Bavli maybe a little later than that. But what about manuscripts of the Talmud? Like complete copies of the Talmud? That's like asking before the Dead Sea Scrolls, okay, you believe Isaiah 7th century BC. What's the oldest copy of Isaiah? And the Christian fundamentalist sheepishly answers, or the Jewish conservative, 1009 AD is the oldest copy of Isaiah. Are you kidding me? Now, it's quoted by other books, but I mean a copy of the complete books, 66 chapters. Leningrad Codex, right? I've got a copy right here in Hebrew. Not a roll, it's a printed book. So anyway, let's talk about this a little more, but you see some of the things that I'm thinking about. Now, I do have an article that I will also send you, Jacob, for your readers. It's just called, I think it's just called Ebionites and Nazarenes, that summarizes some of this. So after our call, I will send you links to both of those articles, and that'll help your listeners and viewers to go read some of this material for themselves.
All right, we got a series of super chat questions.
Okay.
We'll start with I Fish and Tie. Thank you for your super chat. Save the Beagles, Dr. T and Cam. You are inspirations.
Yeah, do you know what he's talking about? The Beagles, they had that group not too long ago that went up. I don't even remember where it was now, but they basically tried to stop using beagles for these biological experiments and so forth.
Oh, I see.
Yeah,
that's horrible. God, it's being stopped. M Blue, thank you for becoming a member. Appreciate it.
Great.
That's
one of my people, I think. Good move.
Back and figure for super chat. The predecessor to Shammai was an Essene who joined Antipas's court. Do you think Hellenic and Nazarene appearance in the Gospels is valid, or like Shammai?
Do you think Hellenic in Nazarene?
Hellenic.
I'm not getting sense out of that, but again, this is a good example. The predecessor to Shammai was an Essene, and you got to ask, what's the source and the word Essene, and what would it mean in that source? You see, for example, Josephus doesn't just tell you about the Essenes in book 2, but he mentions Essenes at various times, and he mentions an Essene gate. And so he has in mind a group that he can use that identification for. But when he goes to the desert himself, remember Josephus wrote a book called The Life. It's much later than his other books, where he tells his whole life. And he says, as a young man, I believe he was in his teens even, he went into the desert and studied with a desert teacher named Banus. Sounds like he's in the Judean wilderness. If he's from Jerusalem, he would be down by the Dead Sea, maybe. There were maybe groups of Essenes scattered around the country, according to Josephus. But again, I would be very careful with the name. I'll give you my best analogy. I think it might be like the word Baptist today. Now, you might say, well, that's real specific. What do you mean? Are you kidding me? I mean, there's all kinds of Bible churches that don't use the word Baptist. You know, it'd say like Covenant Church of the Redeemer. And you go, well, what is it? Well, it's an independent church. It's a Bible church, a Bible-based church. We probably got 50 of them here in Charlotte. They're not part of Presbyterians, Methodists, Baptists, but you know what? They're kind of like Baptist-like. You know what I mean? Like if you have the fundamental Baptist views, like they baptize, they're Billy Graham type people. In other words, that's their message. You know, the fundamentalist message. They believe in the Trinity, verbal inspiration of the Bible, bodily resurrection of Jesus, literal second coming of Christ. And then you can put other tags. Are they dispensationalists or not? So once again, tags, and more tags. Question is, where are they coming from? Who's using them? And what do they mean? And if we sort that out first, it helps us to then, talk about groups. And I'm not saying it's not useful to talk about groups, but I want you to think of it as trends and movements. So I would say this about our whole discussion today. There does develop in and around the Maccabean period a huge Enochian, Daniel-type oriented group that can be characterized by a set of characteristics such as baptizing, messianic, apocalyptic, and so forth, sometimes vegetarian. And so you get these characteristics, but they float around. And the question is always this: where are we going to put the guy? And who's the guy? Jesus, Yeshua. Where are we going to put the historical figure of Jesus? And people have written books: Jesus the Pharisee, Jesus the Essene, or Vermish, Jesus the Jew. Just make him that. And you even got people that will today, a lot of people, oh, he wasn't a Jew. Are you kidding? But I'm sorry, I couldn't understand all of that question. If he wants to rephrase it. Have you studied the bloodlines of Zadok? Yeah. The Zadok became both Zadokim, Sadducees, and Essenes. Pharisees were pro-Hashmonean. Zadok priests were true priests. James is of the Zadok. Yeah, I have studied that a bit. One of the difficulties is to know literally in terms of genealogy what sort of records exist. But there are some records, and I have several books that I've read about that. I haven't looked at them in a while. But when you say Zadok became both the Zadokim, Sadducees, and the Essenes, Larry Schiffman, the Dead Sea Scrolls scholar, he does think that the Essene or Qumran, I'd rather say Qumran, I'd rather go by a place. And that way we know what we're talking about. The group that lived at Qumran and hid their library in caves around the settlement on the northwest of the Dead Sea. So I just described them. Now you go, well, what do they believe? And apparently they are very keen on this Sadokite kind of lineage. And Bachan is using Essene to refer to them, and that's okay. Now, as far as Pharisees being pro-Hashmonean, of course, that switches depending on what period you're talking about in terms of the Hashmoneans. But James the Just could be James the Zadok. But Zadok just means righteous one. And that phrase can be used more generically as well as it is today. And a Zadok today would be somebody who's considered in Judaism to be very righteous. I'll tell you something that your listeners will be interested in knowing is in terms of biological descent, we're going to solve some of those questions very soon, because I've headed up a project now in which we're going to do new generation sequencing of the priestly lines of DNA based on the ossuaries we have. And when we get that, we will, for example, have Hashmonean DNA. So we have Antigonus's ossuary. Okay, it's in the Israel State Collection. His tomb has been discovered, and it's there is inside every ossuary. You hate to kind of talk about this, but it's true. You know, you dump out the human remains and maybe take a brush and go like that. But any ossuary I've ever looked in, I've looked in hundreds of them, significant human remains. It actually forms a line around the bottom where the biological material decayed to a certain point, and it seeped into the limestone. And we've already done sample tests of that scrape. You can scrape that from the four corners and so forth. And then you can do new DNA tests, the new generation sequencing. Hasn't been done yet because of the war, and we've been stopped in our project. But we do already have some samples that we will be testing. And so that's going to be interesting, because then we can, well, if we get the whole genome, certainly that we'll get the haplogroup, which tells you generally what family they're in. If we get lots more indicators and readings, mitochondrial, which is the mother, as well as Y, the father, and we would be looking mostly at the Y if we get it, then that will be very interesting to see what these actual remains say about priestly lineage. We've got a few, excuse me, few ossuaries that actually have the name Hagadol, HaKohen, the priest, that are in the Israeli collection, so we can start with those. So maybe we'll have Zadokite DNA to look at.
So Bakken was being a little more specific about his first super chat. I was trying to ask if Jesus was like the Hillel.
Oh, Hillel. I see. I'm sorry. It's H-I. Yeah, so I didn't get it. I thought you were trying to say Hellenistic.
Yeah, I think you misspelled it.
Yeah. Was he like Hillel or Shammai? I would say definitely Hillel in most of our texts. I guess the most famous is a paraphrase of Jeremiah 6. Come unto me, you that are burdened and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn of me, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. Those are typical terms used for the yoke of the Torah and its oral interpretations. And in that tradition, coming from Jeremiah 6, it says, look for the ancient paths and ask for the good way. Jeremiah 6, look, so stand and look and ask, where's the good way? And Jesus's Q material, and if you don't like Q, the material that Matthew and Luke have in common that's not in Mark. It's just harder to say, but I'm not going to argue about the letter of an alphabet. But that material that Matthew and Luke have in common, it's not from Mark. It does reflect those kind of positions. Picking grain on the Sabbath is made for man, not man for the Sabbath. If you want the best treatment of that ever, get the book edited by James Charlesworth, Jesus and Hillel. Do you have that, Jacob? Have you ever gotten that book, Jesus in Hillel? It's a thick
I don't think
conference
I did.
papers that were given at a conference in Jerusalem on Jesus in Hillel, and literally the who's who of Jewish and Christian scholars getting together and discussing that very question, Jesus in Hillel. So you have papers on every aspect of that. It's a wonderful book to have, Jesus in Hillel. And that will probably answer most of your questions better than some one source, because this would be lots of scholars talking about different aspects of the question. But remember, even our views of Hillel and Shammai come to us from later sources, don't they? We're kind of reading back into the earlier sources.
Now, so back and thank you for those super chats. I'll get to the rest of the super chats in a second. Just to be clear, everybody, Tobias super chatted in a live stream a while back that I missed, so I'm just making it up to him here. Is Dr. Tabor familiar with any Parthian sources on these messianic sects from around the time of Bar Kokhba or Marcion?
No, I'm not. But I would be interested if they're real Parthian sources.
And Tobias, thank you for your super chat that you did.
But let me say this about the 2nd century. Everybody thinks, not everybody, but many times it's thought, I'm trying to be more generic in my statements. Many times it's thought that apocalypticism is like this, and it gets up to around 70, and then it kind of crashes, and then it builds up again with Bar Kokhba. I call him Bar Kokhba because that's how he signed his name, trying to be more historical. Kokhba, right. Star, son of a star. I mean, Kokhba star, and he's Kokhba, which is a nickname, Kokhba, or Kokhba star, in other words. So, and then it goes up again, and then they're utterly defeated by Hadrian in the Christian. So that's one track, Jews. And then they don't ever think about apocalyptic again because they're just so defeated. Totally untrue. There are places in the Talmud, Sanhedrin 98, A and B, I'd go there first, where the rabbis are discussing later, way later, 4th, 5th century. And what about the end and the judgment, and when is it coming, and apocalyptic, and how could we know, and are there signs of the end? And it's very interesting to read. And finally, the rabbis vote and say, no more date setting. Now, you don't say no more date setting unless people have been setting dates, and they've been failing. Now, Jacob, you've heard me say this before, and I always preface it by saying, please don't take this as overly cynical. Just take it as a cautionary tale. Every apocalyptic chronological scheme of timing expectations, thinking you're near the end, this generation will not pass till all these things are fulfilled, anything like that has always failed. And the only way to save it is to say it really did happen, but in a different way than you expected. And lots of groups do that. Others
kind of reminds me of preterists.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. That's the best way. The other is to say more blatantly, like Charles Taz Russell did, I mentioned him earlier, 1914, millions now living will never die. And Jesus is going to come back in 1914. He also had a date earlier than that in the 1800s. Forget the exact date. Some people will know. It's easy to look up nowadays with all the sources we have. But what did he say? I was right. He did come. So it's sort of preterist, but he came invisible. Okay, Millerites, 1843, postponed, 1844. October, whatever it was, the date, I forgot. People waiting in their ascension robes on mountaintops. And this was hundreds of people. It was even, I think Miller might have even spoken in Congress, or some senator who was a Millerite spoke. Some influential people were believing that The end was coming in October 1844, and then 1844 passed and it didn't come. And so what did Ellen G. White say? Oh, I had a vision, and that meant Jesus in heaven would come out of the temple where he's been cleansing the temple of all of our sins, and now he's finished that, and he stepped outside the temple, and now he could come anytime, but he did. So that date referred to him cleansing the temple in heaven. You see what I mean? So whatever you call those strategies, I call them strategies of coping. I'm being nice. Strategies of reinterpretation. But I'm telling you, so back to the Bar Kokhba, and then you think, well, Jews didn't do that anymore. They kept doing it. Okay, Christians, we tend to think, okay, 70 AD, it's a real high water. And then you get into the 2nd century and people aren't as apocalyptic. Oh, well, the Montanists, of course, they were. No. If you look at the commentaries on Daniel that we do have and the references to Daniel and the Antichrist and the different in the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, do I need to keep naming centuries? All centuries. That's what I'm not going to do all centuries. I'm going to jump. But when I offer this course in the fall, it's going to be in the fall, Waiting for the End. I think it's called Hope and Disappointment Through the Ages, Waiting for the End. You're going to find that because of the power of these texts that they can't deny, people can't resist recalculating. And for the Christians, it's the book of Revelation and the book of Daniel. And some now are going to the Apocrypha. I was shocked the other day. I was looking at a YouTube prophecy thing because I try to keep up with some of it. It's so crazy you can't keep up with it. Is Trump the Antichrist or is he the Messiah? Cyrus, I mean, which way are we going to go on this? And you can't keep up with it. But anyway, there's a group, believe me, Jacob, you may have heard of this. This is crazy. We got to get one of these people on. They're going through 2nd Esdras with those crazy visions of eagles and how many wings and feathers and interpreting it in the light of what's happening right now, as if it's inspired. Even though in 2nd Esdras, the author says, now listen, I'm giving you a different vision than my brother Daniel did. Meaning, what I'm telling you, Babylon, Persia, and Greece is now Rome. The 4th beast is Rome. So the 4th beast has to be the last, right? Always, of Daniel or Revelation, these beasts, the final beasts. And so that 4th beast keeps getting stretched or reinterpreted. Did you know that in England, there was a movement called the 5th Monarchy? In England, in the 1600s, the 5th Monarchy. What do you mean the 5th Monarchy? I'm talking about a political religious movement. Look up 5th monarchists in British history. 5th kingdom of Daniel. They're going to be the kingdom of God. So it's very interesting stuff. So my caution is that so far, this has always failed. Always. And maybe it always will. I mean, I can't be a false prophet and predict the future. Maybe it'll happen tomorrow. But if something has failed all through every century using the same books and the same texts, I think some of you know, Isaac Newton said, I'm more interested in the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation than I am in physics. And he held the chair in physics at Oxford or Cambridge. I don't remember which. But he was, I have his books, the replicas of them, and I've looked at them a little bit. His charts, he had all kinds of charts, the 2,300 days, and that intersects with the 1290 and the 1260. And if you start here and count here, well, they're doing that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They're doing that in the Dead Sea Scrolls. They tell you what's going to happen in the 9th week of the 10th Jubilee. And they think they're living there in that period. So
Back and thank you for another super chat. Jesus via scenes seem to be counter-strict monotheism of the Hasmonean Torah with their messianic vision, angelology, hidden law, pesher, thoughts.
well, certainly what they would call the one God, Yod He Vav He, monotheism, but they do exalt angels and other powers, evil and good, to such an extent. And like the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, these beings also function in salvific ways, bringing about messages and so forth. They seem to be counter-strict. Oh, I see. Yes. So I'm agreeing with you. Yes. I don't think they would call them God in the sense we tend to use the term. I am the Lord your God, and there's none other beside me. But even within the text, they find hidden meanings. You're right. There's some of them embedded in the prophets themselves, where the rabbis call it the imposition of divine language, where someone who's clearly a human like Moses will speak in the first person as God. And or a angel, malach. The malach Jehovah, or the malach Yahweh, is the angel of the Lord in the English Bible, right? Angel of the Lord. But we just read it as the angel of the Lord. What is that? Gabriel? Maybe. Is that Michael? Is that later Raphael? Who is the angel of the Lord? But in Hebrew, the malach, Yod He Vav He, is Yahweh on earth as it is in heaven. You follow? And when he's introduced in the book of Exodus, I think it's chapter 16, right in there, the upper Yahweh talks about him as the lower Yahweh. And he says, my name is in him, and you will obey his voice, and so forth. So it's almost like this idea of an emanation that's now manifested. And it can, in those texts, it's a ethereal being that can just disappear. You know, so you'd say, oh, like an angel. You know, Gideon gets an appearance of a man of God. Samson, Samson's mother or father, I forget which. I don't have to review some of my Hebrew Bible stories. But anyway, those are epiphanies where the being comes and then poofs away. But sometimes Deuteronomy 29 is one where Moses is speaking about God, God, God. And then he just says, and I led you for 40 years that you may know that I am the Lord your God. And it's still Moses talking. So is that some sort of scribal thing? There's a whole list of those passages. If you look in the Jewish Study Bible, they have the list of all those. I think they call it the imposition of divine language in human speech. So yes, absolutely. It's monotheistic, but it's so thick with other beings. But think of Paul. Robin Faith Walsh talks about this so much, and Richard Miller and others, Dennis McDonald, that have studied Hellenism a lot. The air, like this room right now, is full of beings. You follow? It's just full of beings. And they're good and evil forces all the time. And start reading Paul's letters with that in mind. And he starts listing angels, principalities, powers, heights, depths, things above, things on earth, things below. This whole list of powers of the underworld, the world today. Galatians 4, I think, he's the god of this world. Satan, the god of this world. He's going about looking for persons he can eat like a raging lion. So today people calmly sit in Sunday school and read, make jokes maybe. The devil made me do it. I took another drink last night and I said I wouldn't. Devil made me do it. That's not how they're thinking. When Paul says, bring that guy to the Yakad, to the assembly, and Jesus' spirit will be present. Jesus, his spirit will be there in the room, and my spirit will be there. I think he's projecting his own spirit. Then you condemn that guy to Satan in the name of the Lord. And he's put outside the circle of protection, of influence that Paul believed, like a bubble that the Christian believers had. Many so-called charismatic type Christians still operate pretty much with this worldview. Satan's doing all kinds of things every day. The angels are doing things. Jesus is doing things. So yeah, it's monotheistic, but people pray to Jesus. Oh, well, he's God. Okay, if it's God, I guess it's okay if you're Trinitarian. Did Paul ever pray to Jesus? Yes. I guess you could call it prayer. I asked the Lord 3 times to deliver me from the angel or messenger of Satan. I would drop the word angel from your vocabulary when you read the Bible and just use messenger. And that way, if it's a human messenger, you're clear. And if it's a heavenly messenger, you're clear. And if that messenger is evil, satanic, you're clear. Or if it's good, you're clear. And that way, you're kind of living a little more. But then you've got the levels of heaven. Robin talks about this a lot, right? Going up. And I wrote my dissertation on this, Paul's ascent to paradise. And I give you a lot of parallel texts, Poimandres, Hekalot Rabati, the Jewish texts. What else do I give you? The Dream of Scipio. I forgot all. The Greek magical papyri, the Mithras liturgy. The point is, when you try to go up above just the sky to the first, the earth is the lowest level. It's material. You try to go up to the first level. We'd call it the atmosphere, where the satellites are. Once you go beyond that, there are all kinds of forces holding you down. You can't just go up, like, here I go, unless you have total divine power and protection, depending on the system you're in. So, I walk around in my backyard and my house. I do things every day. And it's not like I'm a reductionistic materialist, and I don't think anything exists in the universe except what I can see through my senses. But I'm not thinking if my lawnmower won't start that it's because like a demon wanted to give me trouble that day or something like that, or if I slip and fall, that was. But some people do think like that. Well, if you want to know the ancient, if any of you tend to think that way, you think, well, Tabor's, he doesn't believe stuff, so he doesn't believe that. But I know it's true. You actually will be able to read the New Testament with more understanding, because that's the world they're living in, right? Look at even the Gospels. Satan enters Judas's heart and things like that. Simon, Simon, Satan is going to sift you like wheat, but I pray that you'll be okay. These are the kinds of things that come down in those movements.
Ebionite Mystic, thank you for your super chat. Dr. Tabor, do you believe that the Clementines are based upon possibly first century text, such as the Ascents of James, the Kerygmata, Petro, Travels of Peter, and possibly the Book of Elchi? Thanks.
That's tough. When you say based on possibly, I'm going to say yes, meaning that they seem to echo and reflect materials that are earlier. But when you get down to travels, actual speeches people are making, I'm not so sure. Speeches in all ancient literature have to give you red flags because nobody was there writing it down. And I'll tell you my favorite example. If you haven't ever read it, you have to read this. Go to Josephus' Jewish War, Book 6, and find the fall of Masada. We think it's in 73. You know, the fortress Masada. And read Eleazar ben Yahir's speech. If you didn't know it was a Jewish guy, you would think he was on Mars Hill preaching eternal life and the immortal soul to the Athenians. It's unbelievable. I wrote a book that's out of print, but I'll show you because you can still find it. And now that it's out of print, you might even find it in some of these places where you get free books illegally. But if it's out of print, it's called A Noble Death. I know that has a shiny cover. It's called Suicide and Martyrdom Among Christians and Jews in Antiquity. Arthur Droge and James Tabor. And I wrote the chapter on To Die is Gain and several others, but I did the speech of Eleazar. You should read it. It sounds like Socrates drinking the hemlock, or do you know Scipio's dream? Scipio Africanus and his grandson has this dream, and Cicero recounts it. And it's really the same kind of thing where you rise above the earth and it looks smaller and smaller, and your soul begins to get transformed, and you see all the world of the dead is kind of up by the moon. It's not the highest, probably called the third heaven in Enoch, at least, first Enoch. So you keep going up. And then if you can get all the way past the seventh, then you escape the material world altogether. Most ancient people are living with that view of things in their head. You know, the planetary spheres. Astrology is big, big, big. It's more important if I go out tonight that I look at the stars and where they are and what constellation we're in and when I was born and what sign I am, and maybe even consult someone who's more an expert in these things before I make a trip or a journey. We have many texts about this. It was against the law to do the emperor's horoscope. Why? Because it might say, oh my God, I see something. You're coming to a dark month next year and you could get killed. And it looks like you might even die. Well, they don't want to hear any of that. And that could inspire someone to make it come true, right? Like, hey, the stars said that Emperor Nero is going to die that day. And after the fact, they always came up with the horoscope that showed it. It was exactly known beforehand. So don't think of a horoscope as just a little newspaper, funny paper to, oh, let's see what your horoscope is. It's like a Chinese fortune cookie. Serious stuff, serious stuff. Demons, angels, astrology, everything.
Back and thank you for another super chat. Thoughts on Paul using Serapion as his model. Followers of Serapis were called bishops of Christ, anchor symbolism, and back in Jesus, invert sacraments to Greek equivalency, pneumatic bodies.
Certainly an influence. Mithras has also been mentioned as having equivalency. I haven't done much work on that question, although many, many people have, from sacred meals to the mystery religions to the Bacchae and so forth. And Paul seems to be a pretty good sponge. But I still think he keeps one foot firmly planted in the what Jonathan Smith called the locative world. He's expecting a linear redemption, not just dying and going up through the spheres. He thinks that Christ will take all of those in Christ, they'll rise to meet him in the air, and then they're going to have a period of conquering. Space Wars, Star Wars. And they will conquer every principality and power. 1 Corinthians 15. It's going to take a while. And then comes the telos, he says, the end, when they're all defeated. Then he'll destroy death. And then he believes in a palingenesia. Palin is again, genesia is Genesis, a new Genesis, in which the earth itself will be delivered from its bondage to decay. It's under the tutelage of these spheres, see, keeping it down. And it'll be delivered. And then God will be all things to all. Panta in passen. Panta in, panta all things in passen. So the whole universe will be harmonious. And now those ideas go back to Timaeus, Poimandres, lots of Gnostic groups, where people, they see poverty, disease, suffering, war, the contingencies of life, living in this biological world we live in, and believing all these things are going on spiritually in the unseen world. And they want salvation from it. And almost every system, they swap and borrow and adapt, but they all want the same thing. It's a human desire for a perfected world. But the more Hebraic view is linear, it'll come at the end, the eschaton. And the more utopian view, which is opposite of what Jonathan Smith called the locative. Locative means this world will get transformed into perfection. It's a good world that was corrupted by evil, but it will end up good. That's the book of Revelation. Never forget, in the book of Revelation, chapter 21 and 22, God comes down to the new creation. They don't go up to be with God. Most Hellenistic thinkers would go, that's crazy. Why would he come down here? Well, because it's going to be transformed. Romans 8. The creation itself will be delivered, and it's groaning in travail, wanting that. And we are wanting it. Paul says, we ourselves who have the Spirit are groaning. So religions in the Spirit are religions of salvation. And the salvation has to do with getting free, having eternal life, being blessed, and essentially experiencing everything that humans have dreamed of throughout history, and trying to explain why it's not that now. So, okay, so let's see. We started at 5, 6. We got a couple hours. How many more you have there, Jacob? Might as well.
There's still a few more super chats. Let's
do
try to go.
I'll give short answers real quick.
Yeah, let's try to go for them quickly. Yeah. Jason Stewart, thank you for your super chat. Any truth that Peter was a Jewish spy that wrote Nishmat Kolkai in the Siddur, as some rabbis claim, and also Tovia Singer entertained?
Well, who knows? That is a later tradition, but the idea of a Jewish spy is one way to say it, but there are all kinds of theories about Jesus and Peter. Some have it for Jesus, that sort of like the good guy with the bad job to go among the Gentiles or something. but Peter particularly, and give them a watered down version of the Christian faith and so forth. I just don't know how you make those. You have to always ask. Remember, I said, ask what's the date of the manuscript you're reading from, the actual manuscript, the copy. Then ask, when do scholars date the copy, the contents of the copy most likely being written? Now, still, you're going to have hundreds of years usually, right? So let me explain. If I'm reading Josephus, I've got my Greek text of Josephus. The copy would be Middle Ages. But most scholars, like Steve Mason and others, I would say, that Greek text likely goes back to a first century character that was there and talks in the first person about Josephus, about things that happened. So in terms of this prayer, you have to ask, okay, what prayer book? When does it first appear? Is it Sephardic or Ashkenazi? What's the tradition about it? Does it have variants? And what are the oldest copies and all that? And when you do all that, you usually find that it is a tradition that almost invariably goes to the Middle Ages. Now, if we found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, or that's why the Dead Sea Scrolls are such a major thing, because we've carbon dated them to the 2nd century BC and the 1st century, right? That's rare, to have an actual text you can read from that date. And we don't have anything like that with the Jewish prayers. So it really, you always have to lay out your method. But it's an interesting theory. I can give you more, but we don't have time.
Yeah, back, and thank you for another super chat. Pauline sects were prophetic revelatories at first. Later, proto-orthodoxy walked that back, unlike Ebionites with Torah and Jewish faith as their foundation.
Okay, Pauline sects. Yeah, I'm trying to follow the thought there. Orthodoxy walked it back, unlike Ebionites. Pauline groups tended to have to live, they tended to have to live with what they had, maybe. I'm just not totally sure. Ebionites are willing to say the Torah is wrong. Maybe that's what he means, he or she. I don't know. But I'll say this. Those who took the Greek texts of Paul, as we now have them, had to live with the good, the bad, and the ugly, and whatever is there, you just explain it some way, right? Like whether it's preterists or whatever. Ebionites would just say, well, that wasn't in the original. They can get rid of it. So, okay.
Back, and thank you for another super chat. Do you think Nazarenes believed in atonement?
Again, define Nazarenes. That was the whole point. What century, when, what text? But I think he means Christians. And I don't know what that means either. So,
I'll just go to the next one.
Yeah, they all believe in atonement. But the question is, do you just turn to God in prayer and get forgiveness?
Crazed Icelander. Go ahead, James. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Crazed Icelander. Thank you for your super chat. I love that me and Jacob had the same resting face staring into the endless void of death. Oh, thank you for the super chat. Curbinator.
Meaning like your everyday look when you just think of life, Jacob?
I think he's talking about the way I look at the screen as I'm taking in the answers. I don't know. I'm not sure. Curbinator 5000.
I like the way you look.
Thanks. Curbinator 5000. Thank you for your super chat. Do you think it's possible that someone deliberately mixed pig bones with the remains at Masada in order to desecrate the dead and perhaps prevent their resurrection at the end of the age?
Boy, that's a long discussion, unfortunately. I did a show with Jacob on the Masada bones and all that. That would answer some of that. The pig bones were in the southern caves, but they weren't in all of the southern caves. And so it could be that later when the Romans occupy the place, you use those, there's also poop in those caves, to get rid of excrement. So they just made it their garbage dump so you could find pig bones. But if you're talking about the specific cave I've studied, Cave 2000, 2001, there's no reports of pig bones in that cave. And we've interviewed the actual person who excavated it. So,
Kevin Hogan, thank you for your super chat. Doctor, Dead Sea Scrolls course was excellent. Is it possible the Dead Sea Scrolls library was a combo of Temple Scrolls 70 AD stashed in the caves along with those copied by Qumran group? Second, what other source am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, the Copper Scroll, Shimon Gibson has just published an article on the Copper Scroll where he's arguing that it's from the Bar Kokhba period. Pretty effectively, he argues it. Check his academia.edu page. He might have put it up, Shimon Gibson. But you can make a good case that it's an eclectic library, either of the sect or maybe before 70, as Jewish groups leave and flee, they come and bring books and they're collecting them. We're just imagining what happened. You're talking about the years from maybe 66 to 70. And as the Romans surround Jerusalem and put a perimeter around it, there are lots of people left outside with books. And we know they're found at Masada. People carry their books. So yes, there could be books from all over as well. The Temple Scroll, for example, has sacrifices in building the temple. I'm not convinced that the original earlier followers of the teacher even wanted a temple. That's argued both ways. But there are texts about build me a temple of men, that their prayers can be offered. We are the temple, kind of thing. And that's, even Paul picks up on that idea. It's not uncommon. Jonathan Smith wrote an article in Map is Not Territory, his book, called The Temple and the Magician. He always has these great titles. The temple would be the old view where you go, here's the God, he lives there, you go worship him in the temple and bring your gifts. The magician is a roving, charismatic, holy person that's negotiating the heavens with power, working miracles and healings, and you go to that person. So Jesus is the magician. And it's not magician like we use it today. Morton Smith wrote Jesus the Magician to make that very point. So temple, the temple and the magician. Peter Brown wrote a very famous treatment of the holy man in late antiquity, where the holy person becomes the nexus of divine revelation and power, not a space somewhere. So these are accommodations too. And that's why today it's really hard to rebuild a Jewish temple, not just because of the Dome of the Rock or anything like that, or it being a Muslim holy site in the eyes of many Muslims, but because it's locative, meaning Jews all over the world are worshiping and thinking of their access to God as free and open, Yom Kippur and so forth, that it's like a heavenly thing. And do you really have to go to that exact space in order to contact God? Going to a temple somewhere is a ancient idea and very widespread, but it's the house of the God, basically. That's what a temple is, right? It's the house of the God.
We just got 2 more super chats, and that's it. Jason Stewart, thank you for another super chat. What is Tabor's view on Jewish Christian Pasadena? Are they Nazarene remnant? Did they or any other Nazarene survive post-mid-ages?
I don't know. I just don't know. I do think generally what we could call Jewish Christians survive in every age, and at different times they flourish, at different times they're more repressed. And in my book on end of days, waiting for the end of days, I'll try to trace some of that because many of those groups are Judeo-Christian. But usually we just define it by whether they keep the seventh-day Sabbath, worry about dietary laws, and observe Jewish festivals, and read the Hebrew Bible or a translation thereof. Okay?
We're going for the last one. Just to remind everybody, like I said in the chat earlier, we're out of time. No more super chats. Steve M., thank you for your super chat. Just imagine how different Christianity would be today if Demir's idea had won the Christian debates early in the church.
Yeah, you're thinking of my exam questions. You know, now that everybody cheats on exams with AI, all the years I taught at 3 universities, Notre Dame, William & Mary, and UNC Charlotte, I gave blue book exams where you got to write in the book. But also I gave questions like that. What if, like we study, say, early Christianity, and here's the exam question. Tell me all about the Council of Nicaea, so they got to know that. And now tell me yourself. What if a few bishops had not made it? Because some didn't. They were waylaid and stopped from going, as you probably know. And the vote went the other way, and Arius had won. How would that have changed Christianity for the next century? So see, they got to think about, with your knowledge of what happened in the fifth century, because we also study Augustine. So that's a great question, and the answer is, isn't it nice to think about that? Or what if Paul had decided that he was wrong and went back and became a Pharisee? What would it be like? Or what if all of Paul's letters were lost and we didn't have them?
That would have been interesting.
Or what if Jesus went to India, which the Kashmir people think he did, and survived the cross? So most of us try to avoid many of those what if questions, but I think some of them are interesting to think about.
So I'll have all the relevant links added in a little bit here in the description below and the pinned comment. And with that being said,
great.
James, thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me. It was fun. 2 hours. We did good.
Yeah. And thanks everybody that watched and thanks everybody else that super chatted. Really appreciate it. See y'all later. Thanks again, James.
Okay.
Hello viewers, thanks for watching this video from the History Valley YouTube channel. Please don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell. And if any of you wish to further support this channel, please consider checking out this channel's Patreon page and becoming a patron. And or donate through PayPal or through Super Chat during your live stream. Thank you.